Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Alan Williams, who I spoke to a few years ago to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. He was in Australia. I was not. I was in the UK. The quality is quite good, surprisingly, and because it was by landline and phone. And you might say the Rubettes, that's not indie pop, but is it really? Let's face it, all those bands from the 80s that we loved so much would have listened to that glam rock period, the early 70s, of people like Sweet Slade, T-Rex, Gary Glitter, and the Rubettes, obviously. Anyway, this is the interview with Alan. So after several minutes of interest and a casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years and much more. Anyway, over to you.
Well, I mean, obviously it's, way back then. I don't know. I don't suppose I wasn't really into music until teenage years, quite honestly, and that was sort of that would have been mid-60s, of course, yeah, and just when the Beatles had started up. But and before that, there was bands like Spencer Davis, you know, and the Who coming along, and the Stones, of course.
Yes.
So as far as favourites concerned, at that time. As I say, I was more into playing football and stuff like that when I was about 15, 16, or, ish, I suppose. I didn't spend a lot of time going to clubs or anything. Well, there wasn't clubs to go to in those days.
Yes.
And music venues were usually pubs or clubs, you know, that kind of thing. So, but I got into, when I was about 15, 16, I got interested in music. I thought I'd give it a try, but I befriended someone in my school. He became my friend only the fact that he was the only one with an electric guitar. Because my family, we come from the East End, and we weren't very, we didn't have very much money and stuff, and having electric guitars and things, or any kind of guitar in those days it wasn't even thought of, you know. So I sort of befriended him and used to go around his house purely to pick up his guitar, which is a bit horrible to say now, but that's the way it was, you know. I sort of learnt to play from that. But my first band I really got into was the Shadows,
right,
which I learnt to play with, you know.
Yes, well, I know that a few years later, a lot of those kind of 70s, I suppose, punk bands, they sort of really picked up on Hank because his sort of style of playing and sort of straight chord, rather than the sort of Jimi Hendrix kind of bending chords and, you know, much more complicated. Sure. People sort of preferred to sort of copy Hank really than sort of trying to copy one of the...
Well, they copied, because that was in the 70s, wasn't it? And they copied bands like us, I suppose.
Yeah,
you know, but not, as you say, we had a few more chords in our songs and stuff. So, but earlier on, but I learned to, I got into bands like my favourite singer became Stevie Winwood, Spencer Davis group. I remember seeing him in a club in I think I was about 17, 18, and he was I think he's 15 at the time. They were just coming to the fore. And I thought it was amazing, and he had this Fender Stratocaster around his neck, which was bigger than him. It looked to be, you know, and amazing singer and stuff. And I formed a band at that time, and we used to play in the local clubs, pubs rather, and in the East End of London. And that's how we sort of learned our trade, because we were playing virtually every night of the week.
Yeah.
I turned professional, semi-professional, when I was about 18, I believe, and and I've never looked back from there, really.
Which is impressive, because most people who I interview, I suppose a lot of them are 80s bands. They normally have a sort of quite a short period, really, of quite intense, but it doesn't last that long, and then things happen, and what it's like in the world of music. So actually, staying with it.
Yeah.
I mean, were you kind of, because it sounds like you're from quite a working class background? Was there kind of a determination not to get thrown, or thinking a bit like, I have to say, I love people like David Bowie and Lemmy from Motorhead. They just kind of had one path. They were just going to do music, and part of it was kind of, I think, on some way, was not desperation, but certainly a sense of, actually, I'm not sure I can do anything else in my life, and this is the only thing. So they're going to have to go through all the ups and downs and difficult period. I mean, did you have that same feeling of like, actually, there isn't really another path that I'm going to be able to do, so it's going to be music or bust?
I mean, I knew that in my mid-teens I wanted to be a pop star, and that was the only direction I would be going in, because when I think that's the difference. If music gets into your blood and that's all you want to be, it's almost like you're falling in love. If you've ever been in love with someone so intensely that it actually hurts when you're not doing it or you're not with them. And I think that's just similarly to music. I used to practice 7 or 8 hours a day. I'd drive my parents nuts. And they said, please go, keep going over that same song. But to me, it was all fresh still and drive everyone crazy. And you're right, I came from an East End working class background, London, and people like pop stars or even going to university was never heard of in Hackney, where I used to. You got about 2 people out of the whole school would go to university. And today it's 2 people out of the whole school not going to university. So that's how things have changed.
Yeah.
But no, that was the path I was on, and the difference as well is, I was determined to play well and learn and write songs and stuff, and and every minute of every day was bent. I was bent on doing that. And it was quite some time before I actually got success, and that was with the Rubettes, of course, and that was 1974. So I'd started a career around 16.
Yeah.
I came out of school. I went to work, a nondescript sort of job, and but I would play of an evening or into the night, and have to get up early in the morning. And you sort of 3 or 4 hours sleep a night, and that's but it didn't seem to matter. And that's what happened. And of course, I met my wife, who's I'm still married to, when I was 16 and she was 15, and we're still together. And we got married when I was 20, and then I had to get really serious about it, and so I joined a big band, and I started sessions. I learned to read music, and I started to play on sessions in London and other people's records. And one of those records was Sugar Baby Love, which turned out to be our record.
Yeah.
And
which is quite,
if you want to know the reason.
Yeah, it's actually
the reason for that is we did a session. Some of the guys who ended up in the Rubettes for Polydor Records at the time, and it was only a demo session. And we got paid for it. And 6 months later, we were called, less than 6 months, 3 months later, that was in 1973. And they came back to us, they'd hawked the song around. It was meant for other artists, specifically Shwaddy Waddy. It was meant for them. And mind you, I don't suppose, but Dave Bartram could have got anywhere near the notes. He knows that as well. He's a good friend of mine. I often thank him for turning the song down, because it was offered to them and many others, and they all turned it down. None of them thought it'd be a hit. So Polydor came back to some of the guys who played on it, and there were many session guys on that particular record, and to form a band. And would we be interested? And we said yeah, and the rest is history, so to speak.
Absolutely.
We formed a band with some other friends of ours, other musician friends, and we got Top of the Pops in I think it was April '74. Very lucky to get that, and we did, and it was number 1 within 2 weeks.
Which was kind of yes, that's amazing. I mean, just before then, when you were talking about working on sessions, I know Jimmy Page, who went on to Led Zeppelin. He appeared on a lot of kind of bands and albums and stuff like that. Were you doing a very similar kind of gig to that, as sort of being a gun for hire, so to speak?
Well, yeah, of course, yes, of course. We played on some of the particularly memorable songs, which some of us played on at that time, was Kung Fu Fighting on that, and one of my favourites that we were on. It's still one that I covet as one of the best other people's hits that we were on. Randy Van Warmer, Just When I Needed You Most.
Classic.
That's you may be familiar with that song.
Yeah.
It was a number one all over the world, and that's the Rubettes backing vocals on that. And although that wasn't made until about 76, I believe, 77, we were asked to, Randy especially asked for us to sing on it because he'd heard our vocals and stuff. So that's a really nice one. But earlier on, we played on lots of records that weren't hits, of course. Barry Blue, with dancing on Saturday night and all that. We were actually in the Blue Band at the same time that the Rubettes had started. And because I remember being on tour with Barry in his band. He was touring with these hit records, and we were in his backing band at the same time that the Rubettes were on Top of the Pops. So we hadn't actually changed over at that point, so we were in two bands at the same time.
Wow. And were you at that stage, were you sort of aware of those kind of shifts? I mean, it's a little bit different when you look back at something, but at the time, that kind of 60s period where everything becomes very technicolor, and there's the fashion world and photography world and kind of the psychedelic pop stuff, and a huge amount of change had happened in that 5 year from 65 to 70, and then there's a change again, because it's, like any scene, it does fade, and you had people like Jimi Hendrix, Morrison, and Janis Joplin all dying kind of very close together in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So there was a definite feeling of one chapter closing and then another chapter opening. Were you conscious of that? Because you must have been kind of at that age where you kind of were right in it at the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, from the 60s to the 70s, of course, there was a distinct change, because even recording techniques were changing. We was using lots more double tracking and, making all those big plush sounds. The orchestras were coming into their own. I think that probably started around the time at the early 70s when you had like Love Affair, with with all their songs. They were using orchestra quite a lot. And we did also. The Sugar Baby Love had orchestra on it, and we used quite a bit. Whereas before that, it was usually just the rhythm sections. I mean, okay, the Beatles used orchestras and things, but that was very later on, when they experimented with orchestral stuff and Moody Blues and all that kind of thing, So that it was a change.
Yeah.
And then you got the early 70s. A lot of the bands were manufactured, they were sort of the songs were put before the bands, and bands were actually, a lot of songs, and I've been on a lot of, a few hit songs which we made, and other bands were put to them. I'm not going to say who, but you know what I mean? And they came through that way. And in fact, I suppose you could say the Rubettes did too, because we were just session guys.
Right. And
the band didn't exist. But although some of us who ended up, we actually were on made that recording in the first place. And then of course the glam rock came in there. So yeah, so there were these gradual changes. And you're right, we had about 4 years, 3, 4, possibly 5 years at the top, because the thing being we had a lot of more hits in the continent. And we were still having hits when almost our last hit in the UK was Baby I Know. And around that time, we were still having number ones in France with other songs which were not released in the UK.
Yes.
I mean, when you're on Smile, there's a couple, and hence you get the European sort of influences there. And half of that, some of the songs on Smile were actually written by some Belgian guys.
Yeah,
you may notice, and so we're influenced on that side. But as I say, we were catering for two markets, because it's distinctly different. the French and German market to the UK market.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that sort of prolonged us into the end of the 70s, really. So, then it all changed again.
I know, this is true. Because one thing, because I suppose, David Bowie was kind of my first love. I remember seeing him on Top of Pops and buying the single and sort of, then, obviously, as we all do, you stick with the first person, which was quite... It could have been Gary Glitter, so I'm quite lucky. So it was, David Bowie. But then I sort of realised, looking back at his career and sort of, that he did an album a year, and then sort of realised that you were, during the 70s, were even just, you were also sort of working it in that kind of an album a year touring as well. So I know not the exact early period, like 71, 72, but from 73, 74, you were right on it, kind of doing an album a year, if not two at some time. So that must have been a ferocious kind of pace. And as you said, you just got married as well. So how did you manage to keep that going? Because often, most bands have 2 or 3 albums and then things get a bit tricky. So with the Rubettes, you did sort of really do the 70s very well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we never stopped, and really, in our families, and my wife used to say, well, I'll see you when it's all over, basically, because we were touring and recording in between. We used to record in France and other places, and in between tours and stuff, and writing as well at the time, and it was a constant, and we sort of I don't think we ever slept, but looking back on it, it happened so quickly. It came and it went. So quickly, and we're only looking back on it now, and we think, oh, do you remember when that happened and this happened, and and I'm contemplating writing a book, but I'm just wondering what is. Well, there's also bad times as well. And what do you leave out of a book? I don't know, because I'm not really retired, because you never retire. No. You retire when you can't stand up on the stage, and if it weren't for COVID, I'd be. I just before COVID, I was in Europe in that January and February, and then we had more. I was due to come back in March, because I'm coming. I'm coming back 5 or 6 times a year. I was when I first came over to Australia, and that was the intention, to carry on doing that. I've got shows that were in for this year now been postponed to next year, and there's still shows coming in. So as soon as it opens, I'll be back. And why not, indeed, Yeah. I always joke and say there's nothing on television, but the truth is, we need to keep busy, and I'm still writing and stuff like that. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but it actually fills in the time, and it's getting something down on paper and on tape is, hey, tape, that's analog. I think I mentioned that to you. Getting it down on computer these days.
Yes.
But there you go.
Yeah, I mean, do you? At that stage, it's kind of interesting, because often, I know there used to be those comments that people throw out about people like the Rolling Stones or Iggy Pop and people, but then you realise, well, actually, what else are you going to do? You're not going to get a job in B&Q, are you? Let's face it. And you don't want to sit at home, sort of watching the paint dry. So keeping on stage is obviously the way you're sort of busy and keep the mind slightly active, which is kind of important. But it's interesting you mentioned the sort of the German and the European market, because that's the one thing that a lot of bands that I've done, especially the 80s bands, when they're sort of keeping it going, it's that market that they really need to play to, because they're loyal, they buy lots of merchandise, and they just have to pack it in. So that, as in packing the days, they can't have a day off. And when you're 60 or 70, that's quite hard going. So you obviously have that same relationship with those fans. And also, as Lemmy from Motorhead said, your German audience is so loyal.
Well, I mean, we had hits all over the world, so to speak. I mean, Sugar Baby Love was a hit all over the world. But we never cracked America. Unfortunately, I think that Sugar Baby Love was about, got in the top 20 in New York State and that kind of thing. So we never went to America like some other bands and try to become famous there, because you had to take at least 3 months. I mean, Slade did that, and they suffered in Europe for it, and they never made it that big out there, and they came back and they'd almost forgotten. you tend to have your territories which are successful territories, and ours was Europe, of course. And it's not so much that you go to play there. It's just that's where you're invited to play. We'll never get invited to play in America, for instance. And strangely enough, I've discovered that we're quite well known. We never went to Australia, and we toured in Australia just 2 years ago, and we were due to tour early this year. Australia, but of course, that's all been taken for obvious reasons. That's been postponed to whenever. But Europe is our main territory, where we're still invited back to do, festivals mainly, and we toured UK just last year. We did Smith theatres. I think we did about 20, 30 theatres up and down the country in UK. So we're still very, very active.
Yeah,
which is great, So I enjoy it. Oh, and what COVID stopped as well. We were in the middle of we recorded quite a lot of shows in Europe and in UK during last year, and we now have enough material to release a live album, which we've never done before. So that would be a first, and it's all there, waiting for us to mix and touch up and stuff like that. And hopefully, when we get back to touring, I'll have it ready. And we're obviously, and we're going to put it on vinyl as well, like everyone does after all these years, which will be great. So it's a bit of a new project, and it's nice to to have a live touch to the hits, and a couple of new things. I like in the. I put in a couple of my favourite bands, the Eagles, and Don Henley's my favourite singer, and I've taken in fact, I don't know if his last album, and he's got a track on there called "Where I Am Now," and it's I announce it, and it's almost he could have written it for me. Or he wrote it for himself, obviously, where he's comfortable where he is, and where he is in himself, and his age and everything else is going wrong around him. Not just location, and also I because I live in Australia now, I put in a little song of Land Down Under by Men at Work. Well, of course, because I play flute, you see. And I haven't picked up a flute for maybe 40 years since the Rubettes' first couple of albums. I played some flute on a couple of tracks there, and of course that's predominantly a flute lick on it. And so I it's a nice little surprise, and it's something different, and it's going down very well.
Excellent.
In the live show.
Absolutely.
So it's so we're keeping it sort of lively and and fresh and new. And so things are still going on for us.
It sounds very busy. I mean, just because obviously with any kind of band, there's quite a narrative, isn't there? And you did make slightly going back, but the album "Sign of the Times," which bizarrely Prince then did an album of that title.
Yeah.
A decade later, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
So, was that quite a brave album when you look back at that one? Because this is quite the change of direction, and this is also
Yeah, it was. It didn't quite come off, I think, because it was around the time of Baby I Know, just after that, I believe, and we sort of thought, we could sort of go down a country road, and maybe do that, maybe a bit of a status quo-ish, going country rather than rock, just changing it, like trying in an effort to keep it fresh, because really after, I think that was probably the fifth album by them or something like that, and had quite a few singles, and Baby I Know was a change of direction, so we thought we'd try that. I think it was a bit too, if I can put a political slant on it, a bit too left-wing. we should have stayed a bit more mainstream. And strangely, there's a strange little story there as well, because when we delivered that album to Polydor, they liked the album, but the first question to us was, where's the French single? Because as I said before, we used to produce different material for France and the continent.
Right.
And we're very successful at that. And of course, when we looked, we said, well, is there nothing on the album? Because there wasn't. It was a very country, as you pointed out, it's a change of direction. So they said, well, we must have a French single, because France was virtually a most successful territory. And of course, at that time, you may or not know, but when you produce an album, you always write twice as many songs as you need, and you pick the best ones, and the others go virtually in the dustbin. And so we didn't have time. We were on tour, and we didn't have time to write anything new. So John and I, who wrote most of the stuff of our own stuff, we said, what about that song we just threw in the bin? Let's get that. And it was called Ooh La La, would you believe? There's a French line. And we knocked it off in about 10 minutes. Wasn't really caring too much about it. And cutting a long story short, it went to number one in France. And
yes.
So it's amazing. And I'll tell the story. It's amazing what you can find in the dustbin when you look hard enough.
It's funny how many sort of big hits were often recorded, after the last track recorded, when someone said, look, you've got to give us something else, and you've got 2 hours to come up.
Exactly right, yeah. We're musicians are the last people to know what a hit record is, quite honestly.
Yes,
it's the public that decides.
And how were you, as an artist, how were you during that decade? Because obviously each decade has a lot of changes. So the 70s had started, the sort of hangover of the 60s. You had that bit of glam, then you had prog rock, the early start of, heavy rock, I suppose. Then you had sort of punk, and you yourself have been there, from the 60s period and that kind of pop sound, but then sort of thinking, my God, because, the 16 to 18-year-old, which is a very formative age, is always the same, isn't it? Everyone wants that kind of their sound. So when you get into your 20s, sometimes you just, you're not the same person you were a few years before. But obviously as an artist, you're each year getting older thinking, where do I fit into this? How do you navigate that kind of process?
Well, I mean, if you're referring to our taste changing in music, is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I suppose, well, also thinking, you've done your album, you've done the tour, you're then back in the sort of the sitting room, the living room, whatever, the studio, thinking, right. And then you sort of suddenly put on the radio and think, my God, the kids now are quite different to what they were 5 years ago. How are we going to...
I get you.
So how do we sort of be, we've got an album to do and release in the next 12 months, and where do we go? And also as the band and the dynamics changing and management and
well,
I just wondered how you...
Yeah, sure. I mean...
Yeah.
At the end of the 70s, virtually our career was over, I would think, from a hit record point of view. And now, to be fair, which, I don't even have to say, we're not on the same level as Bowie or the Stones or the Beatles. We never pretend to be. We're in that middle sort of pop level. We were never great album sellers, We sold more singles, obviously. And so in that respect, once you start your hits start to decline, that's sort of the writing's on the wall for you, So, and we didn't work for until 83 when we were invited to tour again. We thought it was all over by then, that time. We just did some recordings, but the band never worked. We never wrote, we never did anything virtually. And then nostalgia took off because, it was in the 80s then. And so people were asking to see the bands that made those hits in the 60s and 70s, and which is still the case now. And we started to go on the road then. And then there wasn't really much call for new recordings from us, There was a nucleus of fans that wanted new material, but not enough to make it worthwhile. From a record company's point of view. And notice Smile and all those albums, my company, Alan Williams Entertainment Limited, I produced them, that stuff, and same as today. Unless you're a zillion seller, you can't even get a record company to, to take you on. It's changed so much now because everyone had a record company in those days. It was easier, and they stood by you. These days, they're not so fortunate. It's very hard now. But and quite honestly, at that time, I was starting to become OD on music. It was a life, and it was taken up 24 hours a day of my life, and writing and playing. But today, people play and they may write, they may not, but it doesn't take them over as it did in those days. I don't think anyway. Yeah. Because even bands these days, they can record in their living rooms, have one hit, and then move on to something else. It doesn't follow. It's not like a full-time career. It doesn't seem to be. And so, but talking to myself, I got into country music, and I listened to the Eagles, discovered them. In the 70s, we were on tour, and we used to listen to the Eagles all the time, which is a bit weird. We never listened to our own stuff, that's for sure. And now sort of the bands around us at that time we'd sort of grown out of that. Yeah, we were growing up. We were in our late 20s, and so we'd gone through the teenage years, more mature now, and we were sort of listening to stuff that we wanted to listen to. Yeah, and that was my choice. And so from then on, I really lost touch with what was going on in the recording scene and all that, because we weren't recording too much anymore, and I was out of the session scene. So it was all sort of passing me by. I sort of got disinterested in what was going on at the time. I was more self-indulgent with what I wanted to do after all those years, of doing stuff that other people wanted us to do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with some artists that I've noticed, especially people, some of them from the 70s, who were right there on this sort of zeitgeist, and then they obviously the next decade, and the 80s had such a different sound, and I noticed a few of those artists kind of chased that sound and that producer, and probably didn't do their best work because it sounds very kind of almost dated before it's even off there. So in a way, I think they realised that, and then sort of in the 90s went back to thinking, actually, we're just going to do this for ourselves, and hopefully we'll have some fans, and mostly they did, to sort of keep it sort of running. But obviously people have to change
that. I mean, that is true, because you're directed by producers and record companies and things. Because bear in mind, at the very beginning, the Rubettes were manufactured virtually. It wasn't our music what we were doing, although I was heavily into harmonies and stuff like that. And which comes out obviously in those albums and later stuff. We all wrote different. We all wrote different material, and if you listen to those albums, there's some very very varied styles on that, and that's because it came from different people, which were virtually thrown together. We weren't a band before that, Right. But we used that as a platform, and it is a very successful platform. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but after that, we went back to doing what we wanted to do, and unfortunately, it wasn't that successful. But and then from then on, we knew our recording techniques and all that kind of thing, which we were comfortable with, And to be fair, we didn't have to then do what was required of us. There was no reason to, Yeah. And you got to have a reason to get up in the morning, And there was no reason to make new recordings. As I say, you got to have a market for it, Because if there's no one interested, and there are people interested, but not enough, because as you say, tastes change. And we were 70s, we'd had our moments, and now it was down to younger, vibrant change and different taste, being produced by younger people, So that was okay too. But having said that, when you have a live album, we're not going to go in and do a big. I'm determined not to do that. So there's mistakes in it and all that kind of, which I think really it's a bit nostalgic and for interest, because lots of people like to listen to the Beatles' mistakes and draw attention to the, and that's, if you look at a lot of the early stuff in the 60s, that they were just recorded over a couple of mics, and all the mistakes and all the wrong words and the wrong notes, they're all in there. But that gave them life, didn't it? That was real life.
Well,
today it's not real life.
But we love,
everything.
Sorry, I was going to say we love those kind of little conversations that we hear in the studio with either Elvis Presley or the Beatles chatting. So it kind of makes it kind of quite.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing more shows now. It's an evening with them. We do acoustic set, and and sitting down, telling a few stories, and people love it, and of what went on in the days, and it's almost taken over from just an out and out rock show.
Yes.
And our shows consist of, the first half is acoustic and telling stories, just like I'm doing now. And and telling about the songs, where they come from and how, and then we do all the hits on the second show. It's going pretty well, I think.
Do you feel, because I've noticed that there's a kind of a period, a passing of time where something happens and we all just move on and think, yeah, that was great, next thing. But then 20, 30 years later, we sometimes look back, not just with rose-tinted sunglasses, but just kind of have time to sort of reflect on something and think, actually, that was much better than I remember. Do you feel that you get more appreciation now when you did your 40th anniversary in 2014? Did you suddenly yourself think, actually, we can pick through these kind of albums we've done and we've done a brilliant body of work?
That's exactly what we've done. You've hit the nail on the head. That's what we did. We played songs that we'd never played live before, and they were from albums, and special things that have little stories with them and stuff like that. And it was a great pleasure, and it's great to be able to put them, because normally we don't do covers as such, or we never did, because we had enough material to fill an hour of what we have to do on stage. But now we do longer than that, which is which is nice to do. So you're not quickly on and off, and you can do stuff that you never got away with before. People say, "Oh, can you do this number and that number?" and we consider that for next time. And to do a couple of things, as I said, like Land Down Under. It's special to me now, and it's significant.
Yes.
So that's what we do. And it's a pleasure, and it's almost reinventing ourselves in so far, because we was 30 odd years, 40 years doing just the hits, because that's all people wanted. They didn't want to be educated. They didn't want new stuff. You could do one or two new songs, but that's about all people would put up with, and then they want the hits again. Just like even now, you go and see any big star, if Bowie was about, you want to see him do all the hits. It's all very well. And when Elton John tried to do a whole concert of his new album, people were very fidgety, and he got slated for that. But because there people want to. It's a trip down memory lane, and that's what nostalgia is all about.
Yeah. And
everyone from the 60s, 70s, they are nostalgic, and they're still out there doing it because people want to hear those. They don't want to be re-educated, because most of the audiences are, mature audiences, should I say, so they're not interested in all the new stuff, and that's for the young, and that we're lucky to be able to. Hey, I mean, at this age, you're kidding me, aren't you? That I could never have imagined. I mean, we had more chance of winning the lottery than to think of that we'd be doing what we're doing at this time of life.
Yes,
it's just fantastic, and
I can always remember.
So big, going for another 2 years.
Yes. Well, I always remember one of the members of the Shadows saying that when, during the evening, he'd often look, to, I think, Hank or vice versa, and they would sort of smile because they kind of thought, God, can you believe it? We're still doing this. We never thought when we were 16 that this was going to be our gig. Because I always remember there was a documentary with the Rolling Stones, and it was like 1963, and somebody asked Mick, how long they thought the band would last, and did that kind of very, he had quite a cherub face, and he looked up and sort of hesitated and said, well, I think 2 more years possibly. And obviously the audience all laugh, because we're in the cinema. And, and he was genuinely thinking, we've probably got a couple more years and then we'll have to go and get a job probably. But, I think you do realise actually, that's been really quite unlucky. You know, like you said, you have the ups and you have the downs and tricky moments, but you think, actually, it's still probably better than some other gig, you know, which, you know, that would have been a bit soul-dish.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I say on stage, I said, you know, it became difficult at the end of the 70s because there weren't a lot of call for ex-pop stars in down the job centre, you know, so it was a bit difficult. So lucky we had the royalties coming in.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a sustain us.
I know. I mean, it's always a bit tricky because I don't know the situation. But, you know, I have interviewed a few bands where there was more than one, you know, like Barclay James Harvest or Gene Loves Jezebel. I mean, there are 3 bands. Has that sort of, the dust settled with that now? And it's all kind of like you're just able to get on with it?
What do you sort of, some of our fallings out?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't, you know, I mean, it's just, I did read something that there are quite a few different lineups. So I just wondered, has that kind of scene relaxed now and you're able to sort of, you know, get on with your life?
Well, it's a nice way of putting it. Yes and no. The reason some of the guys didn't want to play anymore, and then they got twitchy, and then they came back. And there's always been a band which I've kept going all the time for them to come and go from, you know, which is nice. And the whole point is it's not so much the band longevity for the band; it's the longevity of the music, which is more important, you know.
Yeah.
And to be fair, if one like our guitarist, Tony, he left the band in '79, and he's never been back since. But, you know, it's not stopped the rest of the guys or some of the rest of the guys, you know, carrying on. And that's what we've done over the years, you know, different lineups and different formats. But, you know, I've always been there. And as the lead singer, I suppose I add something, a little bit extra of the, you know, of the vocals, you know, so which I think is... we're probably one of the few 70s bands left that's got their lead singer with them. You know, if you talk to some of our contemporaries, they're not even here anymore. You know, I suppose that's something.
I mean, the legacy. It's interesting the thing about the legacy of a band because obviously getting on the odd soundtrack because you were on Muriel's Wedding, which was good, and I noticed that quite a few bands have managed to sort of sometimes almost reinvent their self by having some sort of theatre piece written about them or you know a production. I know Meatloaf did. Jim Steinman had was it Bat Out of Hell, the musical, with you know the songs were played out on stage in a theatrical format. I mean, keeping the legacy of the band going because obviously it's something that you love so much must be very important to you to sort of know that you know. I mean, obviously, when we're not here. But at the same time, you like to think that what you've done is going to be sort of heard and listened to for generations to come while hopefully, you know, the planet's still in one pace. So you must feel quite chuffed that the legacy of the band is still looking good.
Yes, and when we can get back to playing, you know, when this COVID thing gets sorted, which I'm sure it will, or it will eventually, but we don't know when. And if there's enough time left, yes, I'd still like to. As I said, that I've got that project of the live album, which I'm looking forward to, and so that would be something at least. And it was actually a nice surprise and pleasurable for you to come up with one of those obscure albums, which I thought had, you know, fallen through the net with Smile.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of others there as well. But it was actually enjoyable doing, and you know if people discover something along the way, then that's great. Absolutely. It is a legacy, and we weren't just 5-minute, you know, one-hit wonders, which is a nice you know thing to remember, you know.
Absolutely. So look, if you were able to tell or give your 18-year-old self some advice, or you know, the wisdom that you've picked up over the decades, and especially you're one of the few people I've spoke to who's in the music world who's stuck with music. I mean, what would you have sort of said to them if you could have just given them a few kind of bullet points almost?
Well, I mean, one is never give up. Believe in yourself and just, you know, because believe you me, you're going to be believing in yourself for some time to come, and it's convincing other people to believe in you. That's the hard part. But if you give up, then you know the answer to that. We all need a piece of luck, and you get your piece of luck. My piece of luck was recording on Sugar Baby Love, and then we got Top of the Pops by a piece of luck as well. And so, and it took a long time, So don't ever give up, and be ready when that door opens. And for instance, when I started to play on sessions, I had to read music, but I wasn't really a good reader at that time. But I got the opportunity just by luck to get in on the session scene. I was invited to play on someone's recording, and they said the fixer. In those days, you had session musician fixers who'd come up with the record company say, "Oh, we need guitarists, we need bands, we need this, we need that." And I was invited, and the first question, "Can you read music?" And I said, "Yes, of course, yeah, no worries." I couldn't really read that well, I that was a bit of a bit of a white lie. But hey, what I've found is if you turn and say no, I can't, or not, any doubts, be forceful and be sure. So I learned pretty quick how to read, and in 2 weeks I could read a lot better than I could when I said I could, and because I wasn't going to let that opportunity go, and that fixed me for quite a few years. I got in and I did a good job, and so the point is, believe in yourself, and any opportunity that comes along, even if it's not quite what you want to do, because you get a lot of this with musicians. I want to play heavy metal, I want to play rock, I don't want to do all that pop stuff. No, hey, just do what you need to do, and then hey, you can you can change the course of history if you like. But you've got to get in there first, because doors don't, especially today, doors don't open all that often.
Yeah,
and it's like any form of life. It's not just music. I say to any guys, I say to my grandsons, I say, hey, look, be ready, and do the best job you can, and never say no. You can. Even if you need to speak Japanese to do a job, tell them you can. You can always learn.
Yes.
Bluff it. Bluff it. Most musicians bluff it anyway. Come on, there's a break until they need to.
Yes.
But no, that's what I say to them. Never, always be ready and believe in yourself, and do things to the best of your ability. And want it. Whatever you want, you've got to want it very badly. Yeah. Don't just play it. Just take it and do it.
Well, absolutely. Well, and just like, it's brilliant that I was just looking at, to be honest, Spotify, which is probably, one of those love-hate things for you. But, you nearly get 300,000 people a month listening to the song. So that's pretty... shows that the music's still... So that's all.
Excellent.
Yes. But look...
Okay, mate, look, I'm gonna love you and leave you now.
Yes.
I could go on, but
thank you ever so much for this, and I'll send you a link if you want when I've done it, and you can always use.
Yes, please.
But that's been fantastic, and that's been great. Okay, look, I'll let you rock on.
Yeah, I'd like to hear how you cut it.
I know, me too. Okay. Well,
okay, mate.
Take care. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Yeah, good luck, mate, and you take care. Hey. You're in UK. I'm in Australia. You take care. Okay, mate.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Cheers, then.
Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Alan for giving me the time for that. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on any of the social media platform sites, do C86 show. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, Stream. Have a great week. Stay safe.